Does it sound okay with the group?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and in my rush this morning to get these typed and out, my apologies that my cutting and pasting was off, so please disregard the first set of minutes, and what I have up on the screen is the correct version.
Are you able to make that any larger, Kathleen? I know I can't read it. I guess did you resend it? I can pull it up on my email.
I resent it, but also if you hover on the side of your screen, you should have the option to make it bigger on your screen.
I'm on an iPad. I'm not sure if it works the same way or not.
Hold on, let me see if I can make it bigger.
I'll just pull it up too in my email inbox. If the group will take a minute and read this. I know we sent it out this morning. I just want to make sure everybody's got enough time to read it and react to it. If any recommended changes. Once we're ready, I'll entertain a motion.
I don't know. So that's pretty much it. Can y'all see that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's better. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Right. Pretty good to me.
All right. Is that a motion, Max?
It is, in fact. I'm sorry, sir. I hereby make a formal motion to accept.
All right, great. Is there a second?
Last month's meeting as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, any opposed? All right, great. And good morning, Susan. All right. We'll move straight to the agenda item if I can get back to it. Too many things open this morning myself. Okay.
And sorry to interrupt, but I'll just I think we all know each other except for Kimona. She is Jeff McIntosh's community liaison, and she's going to be joining us for meetings. So.
Okay, great. Welcome.
Welcome, Kimona. It's great to have you.
So moving to the next order of business here, we had mentioned this last time. In fact, we rescheduled the meeting so we could look at this today. The Cv2 Funding Recommendations. So I'm showing Sharika going to cover that for us.
And Sharika, you have presenter power to put up your spreadsheet.
Yeah, I guess, Sharika, this is her second meeting, so I guess everybody knows her and knows that she has assumed Tim's position upon his departure.
Yep.
I think everybody, except maybe Kimona, who is new, but I guess she'll figure that out.
Okay, so what we have is the funding recommendations for the NCESG COVID money. This is the second round of money. Under the funding previously provided, that is the round one money from the NCESG COVID-1. And so we have the requested funding underneath the second column, the amount requested from each agency, and then the recommended funding under the third column. We're keeping the shelter at 40%, and we're looking to provide 60% of rapid rehousing and prevention services. I can zoom in here. The total budget is the $944,181 we have down here in yellow. Currently, we have 32.6% being designated for shelter and outreach. Any questions, comments, concerns so far?
Not so far from me.
Yeah, so Sharika, if I can just jump in here for a sec, if there's anybody, for example, Kimona, who hasn't, sat on this commission before, or been a part of the process, if anyone wants to know exactly how we go about generating these recommendations, Sharika's kind of new to the game too, but I've been at it a while, and I think I can, as the chair of the COC, would be more than happy to explain anything to anyone about how these numbers were obtained and why we're making the recommendations, et cetera.
I think that's a great thought, Max. And in fact, I think you're in a great position to do that. If you would, that would be great.
Yeah, don't mind a bit. Is that okay, Sharika? You don't mind if I do that?
That's fine.
Okay.
I can just jump in if needed.
Sure. I mean, you kind of got the floor here. I didn't mean to jump in, but
No, you're fine, Matt.
some of the new folks, it might be a help. So what happens is, we get notified, and this process is the same, whether it's a state, a city, a HUD grant, whatever it happens to be, the process is the same. So we receive notice, let's just say in this case for state ESG dollars or federal dollars, doesn't matter. We get a notice that there's an availability. And this typically, I guess, comes to the city. So it would probably come to Sharika first, because they're sort of the beginning part of our funnel anyway, for how these dollars get to our agencies. So, and that I think comes in the form of an RFP, does it not, Sharika? I think it does.
Yes.
So a request for proposals is what an RFP is. And so the federal or the state agency that submits or sends out that RFP puts a deadline on it, which is kind of why we're hurrying this a little bit through today. And in this case, these are CARES dollars. This is the second round. So they say, hey, City of Winston or COC of Winston, Forsyth County, we got $1 million available. Go ahead and let us know if you want it. Just to put it in simple terms. So we, in turn, Jackie, for the most part, assembles a response to that, which is just an application the way all the other agencies apply to our group for funding, and we send it in, and they say, okay, yeah, sure, sounds good. Here's $944,181 in CARES funding, distributed as you choose. Now, here's the important part. I say they tell us to distribute it as we choose. However, we know that any government agency, and businesses as well, in Jim's case, this, there's always rules and regulations that say, hey, if you are going to take this money, then here is a list of criteria that you must meet. You must, for example, have a policy in place that speaks to non-discrimination based on gender, race, religion, et cetera. Just simple example. You must have a policy in place that says that when you distribute this money, you'll have a follow-on system to ensure that the money is spent appropriately and within the parameters of what you applied for. I mean, these are just simple, plain old rules that anytime. Now, one thing I might remind everybody, and I know most everyone sitting around this table knows this, these are tax dollars, okay? And as the chair of the COC, I find my role, or I see my role as occasionally helping to remind us that because these are public dollars, because these are tax dollars, we are not just a group that gets together and grabs every dollar we can and then just throws it willy-nilly to the city or to the agencies that provide services to our homeless clients. That's not it at all. I see our role as a stewardship role. I take that from the faith-based communities, but I think that's a valid way to look at things, that we are stewards of the taxpayer dollar, which in my brain says that we have to be as transparent as we can with everything that we do with every single public dollar that we receive, and that we also must hold every single agency and every person that touches those dollars accountable so that if anybody comes and this happens as well, if someone comes along and says, hey, Andrea, we think we might want to audit what the United Way is doing with X number of dollars. You know, you said you were going to funnel that over here to the Red Cross and you didn't do it, or you did do it. Let me see exactly where every one of those dollars has gone. So part of our stewardship role is to be good stewards of that taxpayer dollar, to be accountable for every single dollar that flows through our hands, for lack of a better term, and to be very transparent, because part of being a 501c3 is that everything that we do is publicly available. You know, you can go to the website for our COC and pretty much look at most every dollar that has been provided to us and where it has gone. Okay, so having said all that, we have a system in place. And so back to where I started, that system is, we get the RFP, we say, yes, we'd like that money, please, and yes, we're going to do good things with it. We receive that money, and then we convene the Grants Panel Review Committee, which is a group of folks coming from typically within the city or county. I think several of our members currently have gone through the, what do we call that thing? The Winston-Salem University or what? No, that's not quite right. I can't remember exactly what it's called. It's a educational program that informs people about the operations of government within the city and the county, mostly the city. And it's actually a great, I can't think of the name of it now. It's just such my old brain, but it's a great program where they go to the fire department, they go to the police department, they go to the city government, they go to the mayor's office, they go to all these different places, and they're educated upon the, exactly how the city operates. So we've got several graduates of that sit on this committee. I sit on the committee as well as the chair of the COC. So I'm kind of the conduit between the various parts of the COC and that panel. So then we sit down, and Sharika, in this case, used to be Tim, sort of assembles all of the monies that we have and does exactly what the state government or the federal government did, and that's to send out an RFP to our agencies and say, hey, we got some dollars, Bethesda, Samaritan, whomever, city with dwellings. If you'd like some of them, please complete a specific application that includes submitting documents on budgets, 501c3 verifications, those same kinds of policy compliance things that say, yeah, we're not going to discriminate based on, age, race, gender, religion, et cetera. And they complete that application, and it comes to us, to this review committee, and Sharika assembles all that. And as you can see from that spreadsheet, there's a Neighborly. Neighborly is the software package that we use to review and score each one of these applications. So if you see the Neighborly software case number there, it's in column D of that spreadsheet. So those are the case numbers. And then she decides who is going to review each of those applications. Now, typically, we would like 3 people to review them. And that way we have sort of 3 sets of eyes and 3 sets of perspectives and 3 sets of opinions that go through this. And, it's a fairly healthy sized document. You're talking probably, if it were in paper, maybe 25 to 30 pages, maybe a little bit more if you include all the attachments. But anyway, so we read through that, and parts of that review include an assessment of the project itself, where the agency says, hey, look, let me just pick the top one there. Salvation Army says, hey, these are CARES dollars, so that means we need to use them directly to the benefit of our clients that are affected by the COVID-19 virus, because that is probably what the initial RFP specified that came from the state, in this case, that these dollars had to be used for. So the Salvation Army, whomever their grants person is, gets together with their executive director and the major there that runs the show, and they all sit down together and go, okay, where do we need COVID dollars? Where do we need money that can help benefit our clients that have been negatively impacted by this COVID pandemic? And they generate some ideas. They say yes to Sharika. Yes, we would like to have some of that money. And yes, we're going to complete the application. And yes, we're going to check all the blocks that we meet all the criteria and send it back to you. So each one of those agencies that you see in column B on that spreadsheet did just that. They submitted all the applications. They came to us. Sharika assigned us as what are called reviewers. We read all that application. And then for each part of the application, there is a score range assigned. For example, project description, I think, has 10 or 15 points available. So I read it. Okay, let me see, which one did I read? I read a Bethesda Center, for example. I read one of their shelter requests, one of their applications. I read it, I look at it, and I go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's a COVID thing. That should help people deal with that, whether it's additional deep cleaning services, whatever it happens to be. I look at it and go, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And then I go through the other 6, I think, give or take, parts of that application. They have to submit their annual budgets, both projections and actuals. They have to submit a description of exactly how each dollar is going to be used. They have to identify barriers that might prevent them from accomplishing that project. They go through all of that, and for each one of those sections, we read it, we think about it. Sometimes we talk to each other even before we do the scoring, not typically, but usually we do it independently, and then we assign a score. Those scores are tallied by Sharika. And when we arrive at that grants panel meeting, she distributes those scores to us and we talk. And sometimes that conversation gets to be a little heated because there typically are some fairly strong personalities in that room. And that's okay. And each one of those strong personalities brings with them their own perspectives and their own agendas and their own motives and their own ideas based on their past history. So we talk about them, and it isn't that we necessarily have to justify the scores that we assign, but we certainly want to ensure that once we generate that spreadsheet that you're looking at, that we have thoroughly evaluated each application to the point where we can submit a recommendation to the commission. Now, in the world of COVID, of course, all of this is done just the same way we're doing it here, either by Zoom or GoToMeeting conference. So that makes it a little bit more challenging. It's tough to understand, what's called mono-oral communications, which means only one person can talk at a time. Lots of times in these meetings when we're in person, everybody wants to talk at the same time. So that's the reason we kind of have a chair for that group as well that tries to sort of direct our conversations in the right direction. So it was a bit challenging. And again, the other constraint that tends to make things challenging too is time. In this particular case, we had to evaluate this on, I don't know, Tuesday, I think we got together, finish our recommendations, talk about all these reviews. Then it has to go to the operating cabinet, which is our work group for the COC, where they have the opportunity to provide comments, not voting actions, just comments on these recommendations that you see in front of you. And we did that yesterday. Once that comment period has been completed, it comes to us here on the commission. And that's kind of where we are today. We talk about it a little bit, and we actually will execute a voting action today on whether to accept these recommendations as they stand, or depending on what our conversation leads to, whether or not we may want to put conditions on these awards. We are the governing commission, therefore we're sort of at the top of the pile when it comes to approval authority and when it comes to really, really saying, yeah, here's how we're going to distribute $944,000. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell. I know that was quick, but
That's very helpful, Max. Good additional context for how all this comes together and how thorough the process is, how it's vetted before it comes to this body as a recommendation for approval. So appreciate you walking through that.
anytime. So Sharika, back to you.
Okay, so here listed, we have the organizations and the amounts that we are recommending. Does anyone have any questions in regards to the amounts? Or comments?
I don't have a question on amounts as such, but identity. Line 14, the Poverty Revolt, is that a new organization coming?
Yes, that was a new organization requesting funding. This organization was requesting funding for 4 case managers for rapid rehousing. They have a new 501c3 that's been in place for about 4 months. The scoring for the Poverty Revolt was only a 13. So the scoring was pretty low for the Poverty Revolt, which is one of the main reasons why they weren't funded due to the proposal that was submitted.
Okay, it's just,
And that's 13 out of 100. So.
that's a name I haven't heard of. So I was just wondering who they were. But then again, they've only been here for 4 months.
Yeah, don't feel bad, Robert. We couldn't find anything out about them either. One of the reviewers actually brought up in the meeting that they'd gone to the website and there was nothing there. So, but I like the fact, and I'll just tell you off the cuff, in the last 5, almost 6 years that I've been doing this, that's the first time I've ever seen us not recommend funding. And I think that is a feather in our cap in a way, to let people know that we don't just do this as some kind of a, check the box event. We're very meticulous and very careful about this. And if we don't feel like this is the proper organization, or they don't have the skills or the willingness to comply with, the regulations that are set for us, then we say no.
That's
I have a
good.
question. This is Sue. What's the process after you decide, because some of these requested more than what they're going to receive, right? So what type of explanation do the groups get for, whether they get funded or not, or why they didn't get as much as they asked for?
So for example, with Bethesda Center, we did not fund the full amount. Certain reasons for that, especially brought up in the work group, was previous funding. So their request was for additional staff. In previous funding, additional staff has been funded on numerous occasions. So the rating panel felt that there was no need to continue to fund the same additional staff if we've already done that. So the conditions were, let's see. So they requested 3 case managers. And what it looks like the conditions will be is that we're going to provide them half of 4 case managers, and we're going to provide them half of what they're asking for. Maybe we're not going to give you 4, but we'll give you 2. And then that way you can go from there rather than trying to give you 4. So we are trying to not continuously fund staffing if it's already there in place.
That makes sense. Do you give them that explanation, or do they just get a notice that they got half of what they asked for?
I know there's certain conditions that was discussed for Bethesda Center. For instance, they're asking for $15,000 in cleaning, which is considered a cleaning staff, which is understandable. And then they want to bring in the behavioral services for $30,000. So those 2 we are looking to fund. However, the additional case managers, that's more of a give and take. That's more of a condition of, okay, we'll fund the behavioral health person and the cleaning crew. However, this additional $40,000, you can either hire 1 additional case manager, 2 additional case manager, or a new assistant director that you requested. So it kind of gives them that leeway.
I see. Thank you.
Maybe just a clarification question. So make sure I understand the difference between the last 2 columns. So the last column shaded in green, final city allocations, that's still part of a request, right? So none of this has been approved. This is us asking for these dollars in the green column, right? Based on what was recommended in the column just ahead of it, which is identical.
Yes, the green column is the final consensus from the rating panel meeting on Monday.
Right, and I guess the expectation or the hope is that we would get full funding, but the expectation is probably something less, right? If you look at funding previously provided, it's $612,000 and change. So we don't know exactly how much of this 944 we may receive, but it's probably going to be less. Is that a fair assumption?
The CV1 money was a less pot of money.
Okay.
It wasn't as much as the COVID-2. So
Okay.
this additional money, the funding pie is larger.
The way the state issues their funding RFPs is they tell each community what their fair share amount is.
Okay.
So typically, the state would award us up to this amount.
Gotcha.
The reason they
Which-
wouldn't is if submitted something that they just absolutely won't fund.
Right, which ties back to what Max was saying, where we have a feel for what the allocated dollars would be or what's available, and then we
Right.
request based on that. Okay.
I never did CV, so I had never did CV.
I'm pausing just to give time for others to have questions here.
I might just throw in a little extra piece here. If you'll look at column F, you'll notice there are 3 zeros there. And what that indicates, and you can see the title of the column, funding previously provided, that means that it doesn't mean that the organization itself hasn't requested funding before. Obviously, the United Way is the top one there, they have. But if you see in column, both in column C, under rapid rehousing, for example, that first United Way, you see the word prevention. And so what that tells us is that that is a new program that the United Way is sponsoring or coordinating. And in this case, this is a program that focuses on preventing people from becoming homeless. And I don't know, Andrea's the expert there, so I won't say anything else about that if she wants to elaborate. But that's the reason there's a 0 there, is because that particular program has not requested funding before.
Just so you all understand, one of the things we've been working on as part of our work in the strategic plan. So one of the strategic plan goals is to reduce new people coming into homelessness, particularly into the homeless system. And there's 2 strategies around that. One is called prevention and one is called diversion. And there's an incredibly fine line between prevention and diversion. Prevention is people who are struggling with the housing crisis, and there's a lot of reason to believe that housing crisis in the next 21 days is going to lead to them becoming homeless and asking for homeless services. Diversion is when someone has had a housing crisis and they're literally knocking at the shelter door saying, I need to come in. And so whatever the last COC competition was that we had, I think it was 2 years ago now, we had worked with the COC to develop a diversion strategy because that's the closest work to people coming into shelter. And that was funded through the COC NOFA, and the staff person that's connected to coordinated assessment working on diversion started December 1st. So we're very happy to have her. In the meantime, since we knew that project was getting funded, we then started working on prevention strategies. And with the opportunities provided by COVID, we have really been accelerating the work around prevention. And so while this is the first time we've asked for ESG funding for prevention, there are other prevention funds through the city ESG, Cv1, and I think Cv2, I can't remember. I can look it up if people are really interested. But we have some money coming in for prevention, and maybe next, with the prevention policies and procedures were just adopted last month by the operating cabinet. And so maybe next month on our agenda, I can add a presentation around the prevention and diversion work the COC is starting. And these are just primarily temporary financial assistance dollars to back up that prevention work. So the other comment I'll make is, as you can see, the amounts that we requested as United Way and the amounts we're being awarded are not the same. And I am always transparent about this. I tend to put in very large numbers in our request because most of what we're requesting is temporary financial assistance that we will then back up all of the case managers at all the different participating agencies with. And so I put large numbers in so we never leave money on the table. It gives the city and the ratings panel the opportunity to say we didn't get enough requests and we have a request here that's very large. The other thing I'll say is that, again, most of those dollars are temporary financial assistance dollars. So the case managers that would be at Bethesda or at other agencies that provide rapid rehousing like ESR or Positive Wellness Alliance, Family Services, and Salvation Army can access those temporary financial assistance funds to benefit their clients. For those who are new, part of the reason the COC decided strategically to pool all the temporary financial assistance dollars and administer them as a collective is, for many years, what we had seen in our permanent supportive housing programs is we had strategically divided up dollars by agency. And so agencies had money for staffing and money for housing. But what would happen is they would get someone housed and it might cost them $500 a month for that unit. And they'd spend down all the money for that person. And another person might come in and they found an apartment for $400 a month, but they had $500 a month budgeted. And at the end of the grant, they were leaving not enough money to house another person. But if you combine that money with another agency's money, we could have housed somebody else. So it allows us to pool the money to help the maximum number of people without leaving money on the table. If that makes sense to people.
Yes.
Okay.
What
Maybe
other
one more.
question?
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if there were other questions here or if there was more that Sharika had wanted to cover here.
If there's no other questions, I don't have anything else to cover.
Yeah, just a couple little points, though, that I thought about while Andrea was talking. So in our governance charter, we have to identify sort of the roles of each person on the group in the COC. And the city, in this case, has the role of being the administrator. And I think, Andrea, correct me if I'm wrong, they also occasionally are or always are the collaborative applicant. Those are two sort of linked and yet common roles. And basically it just means that, again, as I mentioned before, those RFPs now typically come to the city, and then the city is responsible for distributing that availability notice to all of the agencies and to receive the applications back and to review them. In other words, they administrate the process. Now, the United Way, on the other hand, has the role they play for us and actually for lots of other organizations. They are the fiscal agent. And basically what that means is that much of the dollars that we receive, and I'm talking about the COC now, the United Way puts those into a little pot of money. And then when the agencies themselves say, okay, hey, we asked for, $45,000, let's say, for some particular type of project, then the United Way will look at all of the documents that were associated with the application. They will look a little bit back. Of course, they know, Henry's been doing this for a while. They know the history of that organization. They know, one of our big things in the COC that we're getting much better at is what we call system-wide performance measures. So this is where we kind of look at how not just individual agencies are doing, but how are we doing as an entire COC as a system in accomplishing our mission, which is to eradicate veteran and chronic homelessness in the county or the city. So, when it comes to an agency, she and her team take a look at that too, and the COC does as well, the operating cabinet. Hey, how is XYZ agency doing? How many people did they house? How many people did they process? How many people did they provide job seeking assistance? And all of these numbers that Laura graciously puts together for us based on this HMIS data, which is the database we use to track all that, and then says, okay, X agency, you've been doing this a while, you're pretty good at what you're doing, you fit into our system, we think you're going to continue to do good work, we'll go ahead and allocate the money that you asked for. And again, it isn't the United Way's decision. I think that often is a sticking point for some people. It isn't that Andrea and her team sit there and go, nah, you know what? I don't think they're going to get the money. We're not going to get the money. No, that's not how it works. That's a COC function. That's a grants panel recommendation function, and that is a governing commission approval function. So Andrea doesn't sit there and decide, hey, I don't like those guys anymore. They're not getting any money. That's not how it works. They are basically a pass-through in a sense. However, their role and why I think the United Way's participation and position in the COC is so important is because they make sure that we don't get in trouble. They make sure that our accountability processes are intact and functional. They ensure that we are transparent in every single action that we take with the taxpayer dollar. That is a critical role. And again, I worked for the United Way for a couple of years, couple of seasons, and I kind of know some of the inner workings there. And they, I used to say they hired me as kind of a public speaking guy. And I'd go out to these companies and I would say, okay, what does the United Way do? And they'd hold up their hand. Oh, hurricane assistance, they feed these guys, they do that. And I said, no, United Way doesn't do any of those things. Not a single one of them. They don't feed anybody, they don't house anybody, they don't do any of that. What they do is identify the agencies that are the best at performing those functions and then make sure that they get the funding they need. That's what the United Way does. So same function for us. They ensure that the agencies are capable, effective, and have the ability to use those dollars the way that we intend for them to be used, and then gets them the money. So I just want to be really, really clear about that because I know there's a lot of misgivings. I hear them. I've been doing this for a little bit, and I'm privy to some of these conversations, and some of them I like and some of them I don't. But the best way as an educator is to do just what I just did for you, is to kind of bring some light to darkness, if you will, about how and why we do things. So any questions about that?
More good context, Max. That's helpful. I guess one question, and this came out of something you said a moment ago, but we spoke earlier about the poverty revolt, and that was a new, agency. We did not see a recommendation here for funding. Mm-hmm. I see Harry Veterans had no previous funding. Is that an existing organization that's been around? I just don't recall. Or is that something new as well?
Harry Veterans actually has been around for a good while. They do participate and they are a member, of the COC and a member of the operating cabinet. Ms. Shabazz, who is the executive director, attends operating cabinets, fairly frequently, I would say. But as you point out, Jim, and I'm glad you brought that up, in column F, there's a 0 there for them too, which indicates that that organization has not previously applied for any type of state ESG, city money, federal money, or in this case, CARES dollars. And I'll tell you, we looked, and I was one of the reviewers for this particular application, and based on my knowledge of the organization, and again, I don't base that entirely just on my time in the group, but I talk to people. I talk to Andrea, and I talk to Sharik, and I talk to other folks that know more than I certainly do about the functioning of these organizations. And I guess the first thing that caught my attention, and Sharika and Andrea have heard this before, is, and everybody knows, I'm an Army veteran, retired. When I read the project description, I did not see the word veteran in there anywhere. So immediately that's a red flag for me in a way, because when the mayor appointed me 5+ years ago, I told him point blank, I said, sir, I'll be glad to take this job, but you got to know that veterans are going to be my first priority. And he had no trouble with that. And that continues to be my priority. I don't want to see any veterans sleeping on the street. That's just not working for me. So in any case, when I read that project description, I thought, okay, wait a minute, now what's going on? And I continued to read. And my second point of concern with their application was their goal, and maybe that's the reason that they didn't mention veterans in the description, was that they want to now provide services to the greater community. I am a person that, in my couple of years of experience on the planet, believes in the power of expertise. If you know something, and if you have the education and the experience to call yourself an expert, whether you're a person or an organization, then that's what you should stick to doing, because that's what you're best at doing. Obviously, you invested the time in education and experience. You've had X number of jobs. I mean, let's just take a look at a resume. If I looked at Jim's resume, I can pretty much tell you what's on there. He's an expert at what he does. So I don't really want Jim to come empty my garbage cans. Not that he couldn't do it, but he's an expert in banking and in financial matters. He's not a garbage collector. I'd rather the pros at garbage collecting came and emptied my can. And that's kind of the way I looked at the Harry Veterans application. Why are you now trying to go out into the community? Now, hold on, don't get me wrong here. We appreciate, encourage, and are inspired by any organization or individual that wants to be part of the team, that wants to help our homeless population. Absolutely. Do not get me wrong in what I'm saying. We're well behind that 100%. However, again, as part of the United Way's function and a function of the COC, our job is to ensure that the best organizations that are best at doing what they do continue, in this case, they've been around a minute, continue to do what they do well. So that was the second point that I was concerned about, is now you want to go out and help the community as opposed to just veterans. Well, the title of your organization has veterans in it. What's going on? Anyway, so I continued. Then I stumbled on the third piece. This was a rapid rehousing application. I don't think, Andrea will help me, I do not think that organization has ever performed rapid rehousing functions before. So kind of got my attention then again. I can continue I could go down the 6 different things I wrote on my legal pen. For example, they're not part of our HMIS system. That is a requirement, certainly for HUD dollars. And it is an encouragement point for all of us, for every organization we deal with, either to be part and participate in HMIS, or in the case, for example, of our domestic violence organizations, to have a separate system that still feeds data in, but that protects the confidentiality and privacy of their clients. So in any case, we feel that in order to make the best decisions about money and services, et cetera, that those have to be data-driven decisions. Just like you, Jim. Your bank doesn't approve a loan unless certain data points are met, criteria for lending dollars, because you too are stewards of money, of people's money. So again, the HMI system is very important, and it is a requirement for certain dollars. So in any case, just being upfront with this, I did not score that organization very highly because I did not feel that their application met the criteria for funding for that particular type of program. And I would love if Andrea would explain to everybody kind of a little about rapid rehousing, just because I'm not an expert.
Just really quickly, they have been funded before.
Oh, but in rapid rehousing?
Provided is for COVID money.
Got it.
So that's if they've ever received the state COVID money.
Okay, thanks,
So
Shirley.
they have been funded under other funding opportunities. It's just not COVID.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
Again, Andrea, rapid rehousing.
But maybe Andrew, before you do that, but we're recommending here, right, 50,000 allocated for Harry's veterans. So I guess the COC Max did settle on a recommendation of 50,000 for Harry's veterans, right?
We did.
The ratings
The
panel.
The rating panel settled on that, not the
The ratings
COC.
panel. Correct.
Okay.
Ratings.
Ratings panel.
This board is the voice of the COC on funding recommendations. So
Yeah. You decide if Harry gets 50,000 or not.
Right, got misspoke.
yeah. So what I can, in some ways, both Max and Sharika are right. Harry has received funding from the city for work that they do with veterans. Harry has never been a part of the COC's rapid rehousing program. So for those of you who are not familiar with the structure of our rapid rehousing program, when we developed it in 2010 as a continuum of care, we developed it as a collaborative. And as I explained earlier, a lot of that rationale behind the collaborative was to make sure that we never left any temporary financial assistance dollars on the table. So the COC, as many of you know, is a membership organization. The way you join the COC is you tell us you want to be a member and you're a member. And you give us an address and you get information. So we'll work with anybody who wants to serve homeless folks. In the rapid rehousing program, United Way, as fiscal agent for the COC, manages that temporary financial assistance pool for the COC as a collective, so that any agency who is actively participating in the COC's rapid rehousing program, they receive training that's coordinated by United Way in understanding both the federal regulations and the local policies and procedures around rapid rehousing. And as a part of that, we manage the temporary financial assistance dollars. One of the challenges for the rapid rehousing temporary financial assistance dollars is the federal regulations require miles worth of documentation behind each dollar you spend. So United Way takes the burden of making sure and accounting for all of those dollars and the documentation that needs to be provided behind each one of the temporary financial assistance dollars. And that's part of the role we play in the collaborative. And then the direct services to clients are provided by the partner agency. So as I mentioned before, Bethesda is an active partner in the rapid rehousing program. So is ESR and Salvation Army. If this body continues the recommendation to fund Harry, we would reach out to them to make sure that they were participating in the collaborative.
This is Melon
They
Parker.
are not actively part of the collaborative.
This is Melon.
Yeah.
Before any agency receive any funding, the city staff, Sharika, and anyone else on our staff will work very closely and make sure all contracts are presented and fully executed. The organization, again, would go through training to make sure that they are vetted and trained for the rapid rehousing. All monies and funds that are expended on a reimbursement invoices are approved by our staff, and all monitoring are done, and the city is held accountable for anything that is done. So we make sure that all I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and even though United Way is held accountable for the agencies that they are monitored, the city is held accountable for everything.
It's helpful. Thank you, Melon.
Thank you.
Okay. So Andrea, I guess what we're looking for here is approval, right, of the recommendation. As we see in the last column, the green shaded column. So any other question, or if not, I'd entertain a motion.
Are there any other questions about, for Sharika or me or Andrea or anyone else about kind of what you're looking at here?
Yeah, this is Sue. I guess I just had one last question. So Max, you listed off a lot of concerns about the Harry veterans, but there must have been some folks who advocated for it. Can you tell us how that discussion went?
Unfortunately, it was kind of brief. I was a little bit, I won't say disappointed, but ordinarily we have a much healthier discussion, I think. We have some newer members on the grants panel, and I'm sure Melon will help me with this, that I think sometimes people's agendas and motives, I won't say obstruct, not the right word, do not allow us to have as open and as forthright a discussion as we typically have. And that was the case when we met. I cannot remember, Sharika can probably tell me who the other two or other one reviewer was on this particular one, what their perspectives were. Sharika, I can't remember.
I want to say it was scored very high by the other reviewer. I just don't remember exactly who it was.
My guess would be it would be somebody new.
I can't recall either, but I think mainly the conversation was around the fact that they were not trying to fund staff. They are an organization that is not new to Winston-Salem. They have provided very good service to veterans, and they came across in their application of trying to be able to serve more individuals in Winston-Salem with housing. And the fact that we are willing to train them in rapid rehousing. And if they are not able to step up and receive that training and be a part of rapid rehousing in the manner in which we expect them to be, they will not get those funding. The funding will be reallocated. We do not just give people money because they want the money. As I've had conversation with individuals before, we love the fact that people have compassion, but you must have capacity to do the will of what we're trying to do. So if you don't have the capacity to put forth the efforts, your compassion cannot get our funds.
So is there a contingency then for Harry's veterans for that 50,000?
There were three scores for Harry's veterans, which I believe one, London, she's been here for quite some time. And then we have Ben. So actually, the average for this application was an 80. So we have two 83s and then a 75, which brought it out at 80.
And that's on a scale of 100,
Yes.
I'm assuming. Yeah.
Jim, was your question whether if they can't do the training, is there already a plan to reallocate that $50,000, or does that happen at that time?
Yeah, in essence, my question, it sounded like in listening to Mellon that there were stipulations that they needed to be able to meet the expectations, right, for the training and so on for rapid rehousing. And if they could not do that, then they were not going to be allocated the 50,000 by the city. And maybe I misunderstood, but is that accurate the way I just stated it, Mellon?
More than likely that would, we would go back and the money would be rebudgeted. Yes. That could happen, but we don't foresee that being a problem.
Well, Jim, I hear a moment of silence here. Sounds like everyone has asked all the questions that they want to ask about this.
Good discussion.
Yeah. So,
When is there a motion to,
yes, I would like to make said motion, and I will phrase it this way. I recommend that we accept all of the recommendations of the grants panel, meaning columns H and I is the final, as written, with the provision that every organization on this list is able to comply with all the federal, state, and city regulations, all of the criteria established by both the city and the United Way as fiscal agent, and to be willing to provide said services under the auspices of the policy and procedures of the continuum of care.
so we have a motion.
Just for clarity's sake, the policies and procedures are not United Ways, they're actually belong to the COC.
Yeah, did I not say that? I'm sorry. I
You said
said
United
policy-
Way should be
Yeah,
COC.
policies and procedures of the continuum of care.
Okay. And I think I heard Shane with a second with that clarification from Andrea. Was that right, Shane?
That's correct, as long as I unmuted in time.
Yeah, I didn't really hear you, Shane. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you said yes.
That's correct, as long as I unmuted, okay, yeah.
Okay, that was, I need to read that back because that was quite the long motion.
Yeah, why don't you do that for us?
Let me be sure I get that right. So Max made a motion to accept all the recommendations of the ratings panel as presented, with the provision that every organization is able to comply with all city and state criteria and United Way criteria as the fiscal agency and the policy and procedures of the COC.
United Way should be taken out and that should just read COC.
Okay, so comply with all city and state criteria and the policy and procedures of the COC.
Yes.
I agree to that change.
Okay. I think Shane had agreed as well. All right. Is there any opposed to that motion as it was just read? Okay, hearing none. Sounds like we've approved it. So thank you for the discussion. Thank you for approving that for us. So Andrew, there are a couple of more items on our agenda. You've got the next one, which is an update around the White Flag Center, which is probably pretty appropriate given the weather forecast
Yes.
tonight and tomorrow.
Yep. So the COC has a committee made up of representatives from ESR, Cities with Dwellings, Bethesda, United Way, and also members of the city staff. And we've been working very hard over the last month to try and pull together all the resources we need to operate the White Flag Shelter. I know I talked a little bit about it last month. I believe everything has lined up. Now we have pulled together enough professional monitoring staff between Cities with Dwellings, United Way, and Bethesda Center to operate the center. The county is allowing us to use a space that they have at the Behavioral Health Center, which is an auditorium. We are meeting there today. The last piece of the puzzle is we need to have a cleaning contract in place. So that's the last thing. We're meeting with them today at the center to get a bid from them, and hopefully can put that contract in place very quickly so that we'll be prepared to open tonight or tomorrow if we need to, given the weather. So that's the update. So cross your fingers, we will be prepared to do that. The one other link we're waiting to fall into place is just to have the final contract with the county signed off on it in place. They're working as fast as they can. They've been a great partner in this to try and speed up the contract. So that's where we are. Hopefully we'll be open tonight. But there are those two little kinks we're a little worried about. So just folks know that.
Andrew, remind the group, I know we talked about it earlier this week, but the the criteria for the White Flag Center was.
Yep. Sorry, I should have
what?
started. We will be opening the White Flag Center on nights where we expect the temperature to be below 32 degrees Fahrenheit or below 38 degrees Fahrenheit with precipitation. So I don't know what tonight's temperature predictions are, but they are predicting snow starting at 4 a.m. So the other piece of that is we will make the call by 2 p.m. As to whether or not we're going to open. So we will know by 2 p.m. today, we should know if we have everything in place to open tonight.
Great. Well, we'll certainly hope that happens.
Yeah.
Appreciate you pulling that together.
The one other piece of that, which will mitigate tonight's issues, is we will not, even if we are going to open, if there are beds in the shelters that folks can access, we will fill those first before we open the White Flag Center. So I don't remember all the bed counts, but yesterday when we did the shelter bed count report, there was a significant number of beds open at every shelter. So unless we had a very large number of people come in tonight, or a very large number that came in last night, we probably have capacity in the shelter system to absorb anyone coming tonight. So cross your fingers.
Andrea, how does it work? Is it when there's not enough room in the shelter, the folks get redirected to the White Flag?
So what'll happen is the shelters all have different check-in times. The latest check-in time is at Bethesda Center. So after all the shelters have checked in their beds and they're full, Bethesda Center will hold on to any folks who have requested shelter and want to come into the White Flag Center, and we will provide transportation from there to the site. So for in past years, we've run a winter overflow shelter, and people could go check directly into that shelter. That has caused some challenges. One, because people assume they can go to the overflow and not check in with the regular shelters. And we've left shelter beds open in the regular year-round shelters. And because of the capacity issues that we're having with everybody doing so much in addition to address COVID, in addition to their regular services, we really felt like the best strategy was to drive people to the shelters, fill those beds first, and then we will provide transportation to the White Flag shelter for folks who can't get into the traditional shelters.
That makes sense. Thanks.
And the other accommodation we do have is if law enforcement picks folks up in the middle of the night, which often happens, or if the street outreach folks who work overnight pick people up, they will have the capacity to bring them directly to the White Flag Center. Otherwise, we won't take direct admissions. And we've been working with the hospital since March not to discharge people in the middle of the night. For the most part, that happens, that they're not discharging people in the middle of the night anymore. So we're not so worried about folks coming from hospitals at this point, because we handled most of those transitions from hospitals to shelters during daytime hours.
Andrea, is that getting taxed at all with the number of COVID cases that are, I know the hospital is near capacity in the emergency.
Yes. So we have in staffing the line that works with the hospitals. We've only had one or two admissions to isolation from the hospitals since Thanksgiving. So the COVID exposure in the homeless community, knock on wood, has been very low. So we haven't seen a lot of discharges. And I mean, the other thing is the hospitals, for the most part, they start knowing that people need to be discharged in the morning. And so we've been really working with them that if they know they're getting ready to discharge someone, don't wait until the end of the business day to call us. So that we can be prepared to help people make that transition when there's enough staff in our system to make that transition smooth.
Yeah, that's great. I just, working over there, I get all the emails and, COVID aside, there's a major staffing concern, because people are out with COVID. So even if you don't have COVID, if you're in there for some other reason, it's a real concern right now. So I just wondered if they're still managing to keep up with that.
We seem to be, and so one of the things we talked through on our call yesterday is the challenge for mostly it's an ED issue.
Yeah.
Is if they have folks come into the ED who are not affected by COVID and don't really have a medical emergency and need to go back to the shelters. Typically at that point, more often than not, law enforcement is involved. So at that point, law enforcement we can screen them for COVID on the COVID line anytime. And as long as they're not COVID positive, with law enforcement's help, we can transition them from the ED. Our biggest issue really has been the ED some, but just discharges from the hospital at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, transitioning folks at that point. So really trying to make sure that if we can plan, we do plan.
Andrew, did I hear you say a minute ago that COVID cases have been relatively low?
In the homeless community.
In the homeless population.
So
That's a positive.
it's a very good thing. And it has a lot to do with the help from the city and the county and all of the members of the COC really very early on, stepping up and looking at how do we keep people safe in our facilities, and then expanding capacity into running hotel-based shelters. So we currently have 3 hotel-based shelters right now, including one for folks that are medically fragile, one for folks who are long-term street stayers, and then the isolation shelter. So, knock on wood, my father-in-law got vaccinated yesterday. There's a light at the end of this tunnel now. Hopefully we can continue to manage well, and keep people safe until we make it to the end of this. Our 2 o'clock call today conversation is actually talking about and planning for vaccinations. So how do we build out a communication strategy? One of the challenges we know is the folks in the shelters and on the streets are resistant to most vaccines. And so this one in particular. And trying to make sure we have really good communication strategies so that we can encourage as many people to get the vaccine, and then beginning the process of how do we get the staff and shelter residents vaccinated in the most efficient manner. So,
Right. Well, appreciate that update, Andrea, on White Flag. Anything more on the White Flag Center that you wanted to share?
I think that's everything unless folks have questions.
Any question, folks on the White Flag Center? Well, Andrea, I know we've got one more topic you had wanted to give an update on, the point in time count.
Yep.
So we can turn to that.
Yeah, so typically the point in time count is the last Wednesday in January, and it will still be the last Wednesday in January. But instead of doing our traditional street count, which is one piece of the larger count that we provide, what we are preparing to do is use our by name lists. So you've heard us talk in multiple meetings over the last several years about the lists coordinated assessment managers of all the people who are homeless. And over the last year, we've put a lot of energy into keeping a good and accurate list of people we know and are in relationship with who are sleeping on the street. So we've spent a lot of time in the last several months making sure that list is a good and accurate reflection, so that by the end of January, and we need to account for the number of people on the street, we will use that list instead of a traditional street count where we send volunteers out and to count people. So one of the things that I expect, because we are switching methodologies of counting, is that the count will look very different this year. So just to prepare you for that. Because instead of it being a point in time count, look at who can we find on this night, and that count becomes very dependent on how many volunteers, very dependent on the weather. We will be basing it off of people that we're in relationship with and are able to verify that they were sleeping on the street that night. Ultimately, I think this will be a better count because it has more validity behind it and isn't as dependent on volunteers and weather and other sort of uncontrollable variables.
Andrew, is there any type of requirement that we have around point in time counts can you go into that maybe a little bit?
Yeah, HUD requires the point in time count as of all recipients of the continuum of care funds. We are required to do a street-based count every January. And the count has to occur during the last week of January, and the data that they are looking for is who is sleeping in homeless shelters, who is sleeping in places not meant for habitation, who is sleeping on the street on the last Wednesday in January. And then since the early 90s, HUD has used that data collected nationally as the data that they measure homeless programs by, both for funding allocations and project and investments analysis. Over time, so since the early 2000s, HUD has mandated participation in HMIS, which is the database we use. So they are slowly moving towards using the annualized data that we provide in the reports that we pull from HMIS, which ultimately are a more accurate reflection of what's happening in the system. But HUD still really likes this point in time count, so we do it every year.
But if we don't this year, is it going to cause any issues? I'm assuming not.
We have HUD's permission. Sorry.
Okay. You may have said that and I just missed it.
Yeah.
To add to
early in November, Kathleen, somewhere there, that they knew street counts would be a challenge this year, and they offered guidance on these are different ways that we would accept the data.
Actually, Andrea, I just sent an email back to HUD. We've been going back and forth since the 1st of November, and on how we're going to use the count. That is true that it is in January, but the HUD rep has been going back and forth with all of the states on what data and how we're going to use it, because they've been changing the formula and the information that we're using.
Okay.
We know due to COVID that we're not going to be able to send people out to do the street counts. We indicated that we have been using the by name list as one of the ways that we hope to be able to use it. We're just waiting for him to confirm what methodology and what are they going to be willing to accept from us and other agencies and other cities. So I sent an email yesterday and I'm hoping to hear back from him.
Okay.
And I'll let everyone know as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, great, good. Anything else on that, Andrea? I think that was the last topic we had on the agenda. I'm not sure if there's anything else that maybe Andrea, you or others had that we needed to discuss.
That's all I have for today. I don't know if other folks have questions or issues they want to discuss today.
Anything from the group? Okay. Well, I do appreciate all the good discussion. I think it was a good meeting, and you've got meeting dates and times that you see at the bottom of the agenda. And I know this may move a little bit, but hopefully this will be as close to the final list of date and times as we'll have, but it's there so we can start to put it on our calendars and look forward to those continued meetings and the good work that the group is doing. So thank you for all that you're doing. And Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
See you soon. All right.
Happy New Year to everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.